1.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first public meeting for the Albany County Climate Resiliency Plan. My name is Jamie Burchard-Thoman. I am a Senior Project Manager at Bergman. I am here on behalf of my colleague, Liz Podolsky-King. I'd like to, as folks are joining our first public meeting, there will be a second session later this evening at 6 o'clock. So this is the first of 2 available virtual sessions for the public meeting. As you are getting kind of situated for the next hour, the presentation will be from noon to 1. I would just ask, there is a component to this workshop where we will use some interactive visioning. So if you would just go ahead and grab, if you have a tablet or a phone, a mobile device, open up another tab on your desktop. Just have that handy so that when we transition to that component of the exercise, you are ready. To kick things off, we do have a representative from Albany County, Lucas Rogers, and I'd like to introduce Lucas and provide some opening comments.
Thank you, Jamie. On behalf of the county executive, I want to welcome anybody who's joined us this afternoon for our first public meeting related to our climate resiliency plan. The climate resiliency plan was developed, or is being developed, as a recognition of the increased impact that extreme weather events of many kinds are having on our community and their connection to climate change in terms of their increased frequency and strength. And so from the county executive's perspective, it was important to apply for the funding and to implement this program that, in addition to all of the work we are doing to reduce our emissions and mitigate and reduce our climate impact, that we also prepare so we have both mitigation and adaptation, and that we are fighting this battle on both fronts. So we're thrilled to have Bergman Associates and their subcontractors on this meeting, as part of this plan. They are going to moderate this meeting and have been doing an excellent job. And with that, I'll turn it back to Jamie.
Great, thank you, Lucas. So as we move forward, again, just a reminder, have your mobile device ready, and we'll move forward in our presentation. So again, thank you again for joining us, and remember there is a 6 p.m. session. So today we will briefly go over a number of different objectives. We'll provide to you an introduction of the project itself, talk a little bit about what is climate resilience and its impact in Albany County, and then again, as I mentioned, we will have that interactive exercise, and then talk about next steps, describing the planning process itself. Before we get into the project overview, would like to make attendees aware of another feature. You can submit any comments or questions with the chat feature. So at this time, as we kind of introduce the project overview, we'd love to get a sense of the audience, who's here today, and kind of why you're here. So if you wouldn't mind just checking out the chat function as we go ahead and move forward in the presentation, please tell us what community you're representing or where you live, what town or village or city in Albany County, as well as perhaps what role you see yourself playing in the county. So are you here as a resident, a homeowner, a property owner? Are you a local government representative, municipal employee representative from a local non-for-profit or community organization? The project team would love to know who is here today, and also maybe let us know, using again the chat feature, why did you attend today's public workshop? We'd love to get that feedback as we move forward into the presentation. So again, let's talk a little bit about our purpose, the project team, scope, and schedule. So as Lucas mentioned, this is a proactive planning process, and we're working across various levels throughout Albany County, looking to prepare, adapt, minimize, and look to reduce the impacts from different types of climate stressors that are impacting not only just Albany County, but what that we're seeing across many levels through New York State, across the country, in different geographies. Some examples would be flooding, severe weather events, and other types of climate stressors as drought or extreme heat exposure. And we are observing, the science does show us that the temperatures are warming and that precipitation is increasing in our local geography. So getting ahead of kind of the impacts of those stressors is the reason why Albany County is pursuing this resiliency plan. So there has been a lot of science and data collected on, again, climate change and what we are observing in our geographies. It is a global issue. It can be brought down across many different levels. It's being studied through various types of initiatives across county, state, global, national levels. And so these are just some examples of some studies and policies that are going into that climate change research. But ultimately, although you see many levels of climate change ripple throughout the various geographies, it is a local issue here in Albany County. And how are we seeing that impact of climate change? Well, we're seeing it in terms of these very intense, increased events, weather events, whether it be just heavy, short periods of intense precipitation, which are causing riverine flooding, impacts to, again, the river system, the waterways on sea level rise, and those tidal impacts that can be seen, again, through the flooding and through other situations, such as, again, the increased amount of intense weather events for storm damage and intense systems such as Hurricane Irene and other types of even winter events as well. So the Albany County Climate Resiliency Plan is proactive. We are trying to get ahead of these climate stressors. These are the types of events that are going to put, again, that stress on different types of systems, and what could be the impacts of those stressors on those systems within the county is what this plan is looking at. So climate stressors, as we've talked about, would be examples of extreme precipitation, coastal storms, extreme temperature, heat waves, and drought. And frequency, duration, and intensity is what we're really observing across multiple extreme events throughout the county. And when we talk about those stressors and those impacts, we're looking implicitly at systems that serve and provide function to the county, whether it be economic, could be restaurants and warehousing, bank and financial services. Infrastructure would be wastewater, stormwater, water supply. Health and social services, which could be primary and regional hospitals, daycare, elder care, government and administrative services. Natural and cultural resources, such as water bodies, parks and recreation, libraries, community centers, housing, single family, multifamily, mixed use, as well as vulnerable populations and those segments of the populations that are going to be impacted even further because of different types of socioeconomic variables, such as just access to transportation or even just age. So what do we expect to see through this planning process? Going through and identifying the stressors, their impacts onto those assets or those systems themselves, we hope to come up with, using a very robust engagement process, utilizing different forms of community engagement, which we're doing today with the public workshop number 1. The types of projects we hope to see at the end of this process would be to, again, reduce the impacts of those stressors on our systems in Albany County. So examples would be capacity building, looking at recovery and response, the development of policies to build resilience, laws and regulations, as well as those capital improvement projects as well. The project team, as we have mentioned, is going to be guiding the framework of this planning process. So we look to Albany County as the guidance and providing that support to public engagement. The funding agency is the New York State Department of State, and they will be serving in more of a technical support role and ensuring that there's alignment within all of the other state priorities, thinking back to those multiple levels of climate change, adaptation, and resilience. How does the state kind of fit in with all of the other initiatives that are going across other platforms. So that's a role that the New York State Department of State is playing, as well as the consultant team itself that will be developing the actual planning product and all the deliverables associated, and facilitating and conducting these types of community engagement efforts. There will be a coordinated approach and a very robust community engagement process, and a lot of this will be brought into with feedback from our technical advisory committee, municipal working group, and stakeholders, as well as the public. And as mentioned, there will be 3 public workshops, so which is very important to providing the project team insight into kind of, what are your local observations, the folks that are, living, working, playing in your community. What are you observing in terms of those stressors and those potential impacts on your assets, and what are ways to reduce that vulnerability? So how do we build a climate resiliency plan? So I'm sure folks in attendance have heard of different types of planning processes, whether it be a comprehensive management plan or a natural resources inventory or a capital improvement plan. A climate resiliency plan is a type of a planning process which will be informed by multiple types of activities. Where we are right now is looking to identify the county resilience vision. So we'll provide that feedback later on in our interactive session. So we are currently collecting data, some of the existing resources that exist in Albany County. And so this lays the foundation for the other different deliverables that we'll be following. So we have the county profile, the resilience vision. We will be collecting an asset inventory, which again looks to collect that information, economic, natural, and cultural resources, examples of infrastructure, health and social services. Those will be identified through a community engagement process. Then we'll run those assets through a risk assessment tool to identify those vulnerability and a risk score. And from there, all of those different procedures and data collection will inform the projects and strategies that will ultimately help the county achieve that resiliency vision. Public input is obviously very critical to the plan because residents, homeowners, people that support different types of industries, business owners that are, again, living and working and playing in all the communities throughout Albany County. You are the knowledge and you observe what is going on the ground. And so being able to inform the project team to make sure that we are collecting the most critical information and identifying assets and understanding risk is very, very important. So we will make sure that there are a number of opportunities for there to be this public input and engagement through, again, our technical advisory committee, which looks to identify those experts throughout the community of and throughout Albany County, the municipal working group, which will be made up of representatives of villages and towns and cities, the stakeholder meetings, which are more intense kind of focus groups, opportunities for public events and community workshops, which again, we are doing today. And then having a project webpage, which you can always go to and check on the latest information of how this planning process is moving forward. So we encourage you to albanycounty.com, climate resiliency, and make sure you share this link with your neighbors, your colleagues, friends, neighbors, and get them informed about how to participate in this planning process. I wanted to take a moment and just stop and see if there's anything coming in through the chat about folks identifying maybe what municipality they represent, what organization they are here, and maybe perhaps why they're here. Is there any feedback coming in yet?
Yeah, Jamie, we actually did have one question that I'll take a stab at, if that's okay with you. So someone asked, what risk tool are we using to kind of identify those vulnerable assets? And so we have not gotten to that stage in our process yet, but we will be using a risk tool from the Department of State. It's called their Risk Asset and Assessment tool, which is available publicly online and also used in other state programs, including the Climate Smart Communities Certification Program, as well as the state's Coastal Lakeshore Economic and Resiliency Program, or CLEAR. So we'll be using that same tool, which essentially looks at a bunch of different variables. Vulnerability, exposure, hazard, multiplies those variables together, and then outputs a risk score for each particular asset. And then, looking at and comparing those risk scores across assets, we can kind of see where vulnerability exists within the county. And as Jamie mentioned, use those different risk scores to inform our recommendations and our project profiles that will come later in this process.
Great, thank you, Jeanette. Good question, but please be sure if you're here, let us know again who you are. You don't have to give a name, but just identify, kind of how you identify yourself and what kind of a group and what municipality you're here representing. That would be great. Okay, so moving forward into the project schedule. So again, as I mentioned, we're kind of in that data collection, information gathering stage. We just had our kickoff really late summer, early fall. So we're developing the county profile, which again is the existing conditions. So if you look at any kind of a comprehensive management plan and look at the existing conditions section, that's pretty much what we are compiling right now, which is the foundation that will inform the other deliverables that are coming into the winter and into the spring. And then you're going to help us this afternoon identify some ideas for the visioning process, which will guide the types of projects and strategies that will be developed much later on in the planning process. So county profile, where we're at, and the vision statement. And then all along, we will start collecting through different types of platforms, the asset inventory using our different engagement platforms and groups, and then looking to create that needs and risk assessment. And then we do plan on having 2 other opportunities for public meetings and other opportunities for stakeholder engagement, with the final report being delivered towards the end of next summer. And to keep in mind that Albany County is part of a collection of counties that are pursuing this type of countywide resiliency planning process, which looks to integrate the principles of climate resiliency and adaptation, as well as smart growth. So Genesee County, Orange County, Sullivan County, and Tompkins County are also pursuing this type of resiliency planning initiative. So let's move on into our next section, which kind of provides more of a information and background on climate resilience. At this point, we're going to give you a definition of what resilience is, and there's a number of different organizations or identifiers that look to resilience. Essentially, what resilience is looking at a capacity of a system to absorb and withstand a disturbance. Now, that disturbance could be natural, and it could be man-made. And 2 examples would be, well, a severe type of event would be, for natural, would be perhaps like a superstorm, right? Like a superstorm Sandy. That could be an example of a very stressful, very impactful type of event. And then also an example of a man-made event would be just what we're kind of, working through now with the pandemic itself, right? Looking at those types of events. So think of it as a traumatic event and how that event impacts certain types of systems. So again, reflecting back on economic, natural, infrastructure, health and social services, vulnerable populations, housing, the stressors on those systems, and the ability of that system to kind of bounce back from it. So how can it absorb that traumatic event and rebound and almost build back better from that event? What other lessons learned? At this point, again, if you could use the chat feature and think about what is the first word that comes to your mind when you think of resilience? And you can use more than 1 word, but if you just want to use 1, that's fine too. But again, what is the first word that comes to your mind when you think of resilience? Again, we really appreciate you using the chat feature and just kind of typing in a word, or it could even be a phrase as well. And next slide. We also wanted to kind of provide a little bit of a background to some buzzwords, right? I'm sure folks that are listening have heard of the word sustainability and maybe are wondering, well, what does sustainability have to do with resilience? And maybe you've also gone through a hazard mitigation planning process. That is something that occurs every couple of years and is required for a municipality such as Albany County to receive federal disaster aid. And so having an updated hazard mitigation plan is one of those requirements. So how is resilience interrelated with hazard mitigation and sustainability? So this kind of graphic shows that, again, it's proactive, reducing vulnerabilities and sustaining and improving the quality of life. And for hazard mitigation, usually sometimes what happens is that it's more infrastructure focused and looking at natural hazards, more of what the county has control over in terms of how they can build that, looking to identify, again, those stressors. And then sustainability is looking to meet the needs in present and future to reduce the ecological footprint and increase efficiency. So they're interrelated concepts, but resilience is more of looking at taking hazard mitigation and taking sustainability and pulling it into more of an adaptation, learning, and capacity building exercise. So for this project, we are defining resilience in a number of different ways and looking at specifically climate change stressors. So as we've mentioned, a few that we've brainstormed with the project team, but there's open to others, would be sea level rise. Obviously, the Hudson River is tidal influenced, whereas the Mohawk is more of a non-tidal system. So what is the impact, future impact to sea level rise? Extreme precipitation, coastal storms, extreme temperatures, heat waves, and drought. And so again, thinking about those stressors and the impacts to those systems within Albany County and figuring out how we can reduce that vulnerability and increase adaptation. And when we mention mitigation and adaptation, we're looking at two different ways too. So adaptation would be thinking about what are the impacts of climate change, and then mitigation is looking at reducing those impacts to it. So the benefits of climate resilience are looking to reduce the vulnerability to natural disturbances, increasing the capacity to learn from and anticipate and adapt to change. So again, being able to look at climate projections and understand how to reduce those impacts to our assets and our systems. Greater capacity to provide good services and support systems, and obviously to enhance the quality of life for everyone. Multiple scales. Again, this planning process is looking specifically at Albany County, but you can kind of see how resilience can be thought of as a global issue and right down to even the site level, looking at different types of ways to reduce vulnerability at that site level, all the way up through a municipality to the county, across New York State, and looking at different types of ways that the country itself is looking at reducing climate change adaptation and resiliency, increasing resiliency. And as I mentioned before, thinking about the different types of natural systems can have an impact on resilience as well, because as we look at the geography within Albany County, there's a beautiful diversification of different types of natural systems, and we need to think collectively about the interconnectedness of our environment in Albany County. So thinking about, again, highlands, lowlands, and then even how that kind of interwoven into our rural and urban areas as well. And when we think about resilience and we think about our assets, we have to think about the interconnectedness of those systems and how one project or policy change for reducing vulnerability to exposure on one specific system could have kind of unintended consequences on another system. So that's something that we are going to keep in mind as we move forward in this planning process, is having an understanding of, when we think about resilience, we need to think about that interconnectedness of resilience within those systems to make sure that we are doing our due diligence to have a better understanding of kind of reducing those unintended consequences of doing something that is good and beneficial for one system, but might have kind of a bad or a poor impact on another type of system itself. So let's just talk a little very high level. We're almost at the half hour. We want to make sure that there's enough time for the session itself for you to provide feedback to the project team. So at a very high level, we're just going to talk about, again, the idea of climate resilience. So thinking about that type of climate stressor as a severe, very traumatic event. Again, thinking about sea level rise, precipitation, drought, heat waves. So within that context of climate change, and let's think about it in terms of our assets. So when we talk about infrastructure, let's kind of take those two conversations and pull them together. So the resilience of those examples of infrastructure systems, power supply, transportation, hazard, stormwater, water supply, and thinking about the impact or the stressors would have on that network. So sea level rise can affect bridge clearances and put coastal infrastructure at risk, and storms events and flooding can disrupt services and access. So that's one example of kind of that resilience plus the asset. Moving on into the economic system. So small businesses, a downtown center, lodging, restaurants, grocery food suppliers. Those are examples of the economic systems, and the impact of the climate stressor could be that global economic system will have that impact locally. So access to goods and services, right? Or the extreme weather events could cause disruption to the physical damage and or disrupt those services and access as well to those goods and services. So kind of thinking globally down to access to goods and services at that local level. Moving on into the agricultural system, which is plays a very big role in the economy for Albany County. Thinking about the impact that heat waves could have on crops and livestock, and if there are more precipitation events and increased runoff, how will that impact infrastructure? And again, thinking about temperature increases that could certainly intensify, more pest and disease pressures on that agricultural system. Ecological systems, examples would be, again, wetlands, water bodies, natural habitats. We could see shifts in species distributions and introduction of new pests, and obviously invasive species could become an issue as well for the county. Health and social services, examples would be schools and healthcare facilities, primary and regional hospitals, public work facilities. Thinking about, extreme weather events can disrupt access, deployment, quality of response services, especially for emergency responders, and increased greenhouse gas emissions can negatively impact air quality, as well as, again, increasing more of a public health issue and putting stress onto those existing health and social services. And residential uses are a predominant land use throughout the county, and seeing an increase of weather events and flooding and exposure could certainly cause a ripple effect for loss of property due to, again, extreme weather events, so loss of property and obviously impacts to human life, displacement, housing instability, exposure to hazardous materials. Those are all the types of impacts that could be expected as well. And taking a keen eye and understanding the impact that these climate stressors can have on our most vulnerable populations would be, again, something that this plan is going to take a closer look at to make sure that we are looking at equity issues and addressing them appropriately in this planning process. So the types of projects that we hope to create through this planning process itself would be focusing on addressing and adapting to the impacts of climate change, which would be that adaptation, and looking to tackle the cause of climate change would be reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which is essentially the gases that trap heat in the atmosphere. It could be carbon dioxide, methane, and sources of carbon dioxide are obviously different types of sectors such as transportation, industry, residential, and commercial. we think about project types, and this is where climate resilience inflects upon hazard mitigation, because the hazard mitigation plan looks at these different types of, when they put together pre-disaster types of mitigation strategies, they'll look at influencing the conversation in terms of infrastructure projects, so those capital improvement projects, also looking at plans and policies, so some of those softer adaptation measures, looking at, code, could be subdivision, zoning code updates, looking to protect and enhance or conserve natural systems protection, and also looking for capacity building, which is certainly looking at identifying resources and public awareness opportunities. So at this point, we've got a good 30 minutes, so this is great. We're on schedule. So if you would go ahead and grab your mobile device, the tablet, open up another tab on your desktop. We are looking for you, the public, to inform the project team of your opinions. And so that would better reflect, again, your observations of your interaction with different systems that we've introduced to you and assets, and your observations of some of these stressors, these climate change stressors. So please go to menti.com, and if you would enter the code 92453895. So I'll give you a few seconds to go over to menti.com. And the code again is 92453895. And what we can do here is we'll be able to see in real time participation from our stakeholders. So in one word or phrase, what is the most defining characteristic of Albany County that should be preserved into the future? So again, I would encourage the stakeholders to kind of reflect on our description of those assets or systems: economic, health and social services, infrastructure, natural and cultural resources, housing. What is that characteristic of Albany County that should be preserved into the future? What makes Albany County unique? Is there a component of any of those assets or systems that is truly important to you? Quality of life. Okay, it looks like we should, oh, there we go. I always feel like I'm ready to move to the next question. We've got affordable housing, access to nature, and quality education system. That's great. All right, well, let's go ahead and move to the second question. Thank you, everyone. So this one's going to take a little bit more time because this is a ranking exercise. So you get to choose from 5 different examples and put them to the most important to the least important. So you're kind of moving the different choices from 1 to 5. So please rank the following asset categories in order of their importance to you. So again, most important would be 1 and least important would be 5. So the different asset categories, which we've discussed, and so I'll kind of give you some ideas now as you rank them yourself. Economic could be downtown center, small business, employment hub, restaurants, bank and financial services, grocery, food suppliers. Those are examples of the economic asset. Housing, single family, multifamily, affordable housing, supportive housing, mixed use. Natural and cultural resources, wetlands, marinas, agricultural areas, cultural and religious establishments, libraries, hunting and fishing lands, natural protective features, infrastructure systems, navigable waterway facilities, power supply, transportation, water supply, stormwater, telecommunications, and health and social services, public works facilities, government and administrative services, daycare, elder care, healthcare facilities, primary and regional hospitals, higher education institutions. So it looks like we've got the most important would be natural and cultural resources, followed by housing, health and social services, economic and infrastructure. Okay, great, thank you. So this is another ranking exercise. Please rank the following climate stressors based on the impact you think they'll have on the county, 1 being the biggest and 5 the least. So these are just a few that we pulled out from our presentation. So thinking about some of the stressors we've talked about, heat waves, drought, snowstorms, sea level rise, extreme precipitation, which leads to flooding. What do you think would have the biggest impact? Which of these stressors would have the biggest impact on assets and systems within Albany County? So it looks like 1 would be extreme precipitation and flooding, followed by heat waves, snowstorms, sea level rise, and drought. With this particular question, you get to kind of slide along, so you can decide whether it's a low vulnerability or a high vulnerability. So again, that's exposure to the actual stressor itself. So in your opinion, which assets do you think are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change? Thinking about those 5 categories again. Reflecting on assets and the systems within the county, thinking about the stressors that we just discussed and ranked, think about those stressors and the impact on those assets, and then that will help us identify whether it's a low or a high vulnerability. Great, so it looks like housing and infrastructure would have the highest vulnerability, with natural and cultural systems having lower vulnerability, according to the public survey. Great. Thank you. Let's move along to our next question. So now if we can think, this is kind of like a scenario planning exercise. It's 2080. In one word or phrase, describe what it's like to live and work in Albany County. So in this particular question, you can kind of break it down, think about the climate stressors we've reviewed, think about the threats to the assets, what we want to do is kind of have a better understanding of, very similar to a comprehensive management strategy where you're identifying areas for growth, areas for development, areas for conservation, a master plan for community development. Let's think about that in context to climate, and think about Albany County and where we want to be in 2080. So the feedback above average, we have taken steps, hopefully similar to now. You know, again, it underscores the valuable process of going through a climate resiliency plan to be proactive and to create and support the quality of life, right, as a vision for Albany County, a characteristic that we want to preserve and keep, and then looking to understanding the impacts of climate and the climate stressors, figuring out how to become above average, and that we've taken steps to reduce vulnerability. And if successful, we can be similar to where we are now in our current environment in 2020, or even better than that, to support a quality of life that's good for everyone. What project would you like to see implemented? So what's your dream project to help the county adapt to climate change and achieve that vision, right? So we're thinking about all of the things that you've identified, the characteristics that are important to you. Think about the assets, think about the types of projects and strategies that we're looking to achieve in this planning process. Think about those mitigation buckets. So is it a capital improvement project? Is it something that's structural? Is it something that we build? Or maybe your dream project is something along the lines of a softer approach. So maybe it's a policy change. It's looking at our codes, our ordinances, looking at ways to build resiliency into some of those different policy frameworks. Maybe it's looking at the natural protective systems. Are there areas that we should look to conserve or to preserve or to increase access to in terms of equitable ownership for access to natural and cultural resources, expanding parks and recreation, natural habitats, other types of protective features in the county. Maybe it's capacity building. Is there resources that need to be funneled to certain places to support, again, staff, people resources to get the job done, access to funding, looking to create types of public awareness campaigns to achieve that vision. These are just some examples of those mitigation buckets. And what is your dream project? This is really an opportunity for you to kind of be creative and to help us better understand how we can frame some of those projects and strategies to meet the needs of the county. So we have continuing to promote green infrastructure. So green infrastructure is a form of stormwater management strategy that looks to reduce runoff from rain events. So kind of taking that water and infiltrating it into the ground. Green infrastructure could be at the site level. So if we think about those levels of climate resilience, thinking about the county or town, city level to site level, green infrastructure is a great example of a site level strategy. It could be done on a parcel by parcel basis, or it could be something that's regional. An example of regional green infrastructure could be establishing setbacks along the river as conservation and park space. So I think both of those types of dream projects really are kind of reinforcing the other. I think both of these dream projects look to that climate stressor of increased precipitation events and understanding that flooding is a type of threat that could impact, again, these types of assets. So being able to kind of conserve that and provide flood attenuation services is important. So good to understand that. Any other dream projects? And just a note for anyone who is participating in today's, virtual session, there is another opportunity at 6 o'clock, and we do anticipate having this public survey available on the project website. So have no fear if you have other ideas and suggestions for the project team. This isn't the only opportunity during this public session for you to give us this feedback. Certainly look to the project website for this public survey. And again, if you really enjoyed today's 12 o'clock session, come back at 6 or tell others to please join. We'd love to hear that feedback.
Jamie, I'm just going to pop in here. We did have a note that maybe some of the responses are not showing up in our live presentation, which I apologize for. But like Jamie said, you can either put them in the chat and that way they'll get recorded, or alternatively, this survey that we're going through right now will be available again on the project website if you'd like to go there and take it and make sure that your responses are recorded. So I apologize for that little technical goof up, but yes, either record your responses in the chat or on the survey that will be available on the project website.
Great, thank you, Jeanette. Sorry for that little technical glitch. Your answers will be recorded though, so yes, don't worry. And moving, okay, I'm sorry, one more comment. Get all towns in Albany County to start sustainability committee boards, not just conservation boards, but broader than that. Yes, I think that's a great strategy, great recommendation. I'm definitely seeing all sorts of levels of government kind of integrate sustainability and resilience into their governance structure to provide that feedback, very similar to a conservation board or different types of sustainability incentives or public or community engagement types of forums. So I think that's a great strategy and something that, again, I'm starting to see across different levels of government, not just in New York, but in other states too. So thank you for that feedback. Good, Jeanette, let's move on to the, oh, that's the last one. Okay, great. I think we've been able to get all that information in. So again, come back at 6 o'clock or go to the project website, and certainly we'll provide more opportunities for you to get us feedback to the project team about your ideas. So we've got about 10 minutes to spare. We want to make sure that we allow enough time for there to be any further questions or comments for the project team. So where do we go from now? What are our next steps for project milestones and other opportunities for community engagement? So in the near term, we are, again, continuing to draft the county profile and looking to draft out those existing conditions and continuing to build out the asset inventory using different types of platforms to engage our various advisory committees as well as our focus groups to populate a platform that identifies those different categories of asset identification. And from there, when we have completed that thorough asset inventory and assessment or identification, we will put it through the risk assessment tool that would help to determine that vulnerability and hazard score. And from there, we can develop the needs and opportunities based on that risk assessment. And then moving forward, really through the coordinated approach and utilizing our advisory committees, come up with that initial project identification. There will be many opportunities for the community to engage with this planning process. We, again, underscore heavily the importance of having the community involved in this planning process. So there will be opportunities for stakeholder interviews which are ongoing currently, and then other spring events to review and identify the projects and provide feedback. So there will be 2 other opportunities for this type of public workshop as well. And the project website is certainly a hub to provide, again, the most up-to-date information in a way for community stakeholders to engage with the project team and provide feedback. So thank you very, very much. We have about 5 to 7 minutes to spare, and we certainly would like to get to all of your questions and comments. So to make sure we are adequately addressing your concerns or issues. So we will make sure that you can, right now, leaves plenty of time for you to type in your questions, and we will make sure that we have the appropriate person answer that question.
Yeah, Jamie, we had one question come in about whether we have any regional data that we can share on, increases in extreme precipitation events, temperature, stuff like that. So as part of our initial inventory and existing conditions analysis, we are going through right now in that process of collecting that data. We're looking at other plans and regional studies that have already been conducted. ClimeAid, which was last updated in 2014. We did have some stats earlier in the presentation from that particular report, but as part of our project, we will go through and do a little bit more updated research into exactly what is happening in Albany County and kind of do a little bit of projections about what will potentially happen in the future with increasing storm events, precipitation, temperatures, fluctuating water levels, stuff like that.
There is also some online information. I always recommend the New York Climate Change Science Clearinghouse has a lot of information that's available too, some maps and data and documents. So that's the New York State, it's nyclimatescience.org. And so the project website again is albanycounty.com/climate resiliency. So that is our project website, and that will definitely be a compilation of various resources and up-to-date information on ability to access public engagement opportunities as well. Lucas, from the county's perspective, is there anything else that you wanted to address before we close out our session?
No, just a thank you. Listen, everybody is busy these days, but this is a project that really relies on community input, and we got a lot of great input today. So on behalf of County Executive McCoy, I just want to extend that thank you for taking the time to participate. And it sounds like a lot of the people who are on have experience related to this field. So please stay engaged, through the website, through future public meetings, and the other opportunities that Jamie mentioned. But again, thank you. Have a great day.
Great. Well, with that, with our closing comments from Albany County, thank you again. And again, please come back at 6 o'clock or share this information with others. And we will be happy to continue receiving feedback into the future. So enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you again.